Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Richard Sachs, Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Rio Grande and Rio Grande Community College in beautiful southeastern Ohio. Welcome to Voice of Rio Grande. This is always my favorite show of the year when we have our friends and colleagues from University of Wales, Trinity, St. David visit in the fall. And I am pleased to introduce today two old friends. They're not old in terms of age, they're old in terms of how much we care for them and how much they care for us as higher ed educators. To my immediate right is Professor Gwen Bainan. She's a professor of art and I believe teacher education, or maybe it's just art, but you do a lot of teacher ed. And next to her is Professor Jonathan Pugh from the theater department. So Trinity St. David, University of Wales Trinity St. David, it's such a long name because I know several institutions combined, and like higher ed in North America, there's been some consolidation. Can you talk about your programs and a little bit of the purpose of bringing these students here?
Well, I coordinate Welsh medium provision in the Swansea College of Art, which is a part of the university. We've kept an identity, an art identity to Swansea College of Art, which is a big faculty. There's about over 1,000 students there, and I look after anybody who wants to do anything through the medium of Welsh. So bringing a group of Welsh students, Welsh-speaking students here to look at the Gwaddol. We have a nice name, Gwaddol, which means what's remaining of the Welsh here, and the whole kind of memory of Wales here is really interesting. So it's something we build into the academic year to build a group of bring a group of students here.
Great. Professor Pugh.
That sounds brilliant. Yeah, I've been in University of Wales since before it was the University of Wales, when it was Trinity College, before it joined up with Lampeter and had branches in Cardiff and London, Birmingham and Swansea, of course. On theatre programmes, I used to teach exclusively in Welsh, theatre, media and music, and then that's grown into different campuses. So all theatre is based on good stories. Theatre's got a lot to do with identity, and that's what I try to encourage in the students that come to here, is that idea of looking for the identity of the Welsh who travelled to the Rio area 200 years ago, and their own identity as modern Welsh people in a different atmosphere.
Okay. We want to bring these students up soon, but I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the importance of Welsh in the schools, even before the students come to higher ed. And I was very impressed with the students you brought previously, how learning Welsh was part of the elementary or primary education, which I know has not always been the case in Wales. And I know I have friends like in Ireland who are saying, Celtic is lost. We don't have it anymore. But there's a sense of Welsh being a living language, that you're not just subsumed by the British, and how that affects your practice, both as a theater prof and as an art prof. If you could talk, that really wasn't a question, it was a comment, but if you could riff on that a little bit, talk a little bit more about that, the importance of language to a culture, and how language helps to identify the culture. For example, we have a word, self-respect, in English, but if you translate that into French, it's amour propre, which is love of oneself, which is really self-respect, isn't it? And sometimes you go into another language to say, well, there's no word for this in English, but there's a word in this language. So language does help to structure your experience. And could you talk about the essence and the importance of Welsh to the Welsh people throughout the world in keeping their language?
Well, it's different in different places, isn't it? I mean, the first Welsh school in Wales, apart from Sunday schools, was around about 1947, I can't remember, in Aberystwyth, and that was the first Welsh school. Welsh had been taught through Sunday schools before that, and education in Wales was through Sunday schools for a long time. That's where the educated were. There were Brad y Llyfrau Gleision, so the English came in, did a survey saying that the Welsh were a bit thick because they couldn't speak speak English, so they had to stop speaking Welsh. And so, you know, that's been part of the Welsh history, really. So since 1947, there's been a strong Welsh education in Wales. We have children. Our children have been educated through the medium of Welsh. We've brought students with us who have been educated through the medium of Welsh. So we're in a very fortunate situation that that can happen. And I hate using that word for language, because it's my right to be able to speak my language, isn't it, you know, and to be a part of my culture. We have countries like Patagonia where Welsh is spoken, and they took the Welsh language with them and maintained it there. In Ohio it hasn't been maintained, but then again we're looking at quite a long time ago with a lot of people coming wanting perhaps to change into something else, and that's quite interesting. But there's certainly elements of the culture has remained here, and for me that's really fascinating that it's there through singing, through the churches that you have here. But it is important, really, for us in our culture that happens.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great.
I think there's a clear separation between language and identity. And I think if you go to Wales and tell somebody that doesn't speak Welsh that they're not Welsh when they've been born and bred in Wales, they will not be happy.
Sure.
And I think there are other facets to identity across all cultures, which don't include language. But as Gwen says, there are different pockets of language which we discuss as either dialects or variations across the
Sure.
entire country. I'm in a strange situation, as Gwen mentioned. We've both got children. My children have been taught exclusively through the medium of Welsh. They've been taught English through the medium of Welsh. They live through a Welsh culture. There's organisations such as the Urdd who hold singing and sports, cultural community events throughout the year for young people up to the age of 25.
Wow.
And so and those aren't exclusively for Welsh speakers. If you have any Welsh or just want to come in, you're welcome to expand your idea of what you are physically, mentally, and in a community sense. So it is quite dangerous sometimes to presume that a language is the only marker of an identity. Because it's not. And I can say that quite passionately because my own family aren't all Welsh speaking, but that doesn't mean they're not Welsh.
Right. Great. Thank you for that discussion. That was fascinating. Well, let's start to bring some of the students up front here. And I think, did Mike have a process for this? And so we'll trade out. This will keep me upright rather than off the stage and in a corner. Great. So why don't you get comfortable here? And your speaker's on. Do you want to identify yourself to the audience?
Yeah, my name is Bryony and I'm a product design student at University of Wales, Trinity St David.
Great. So this is Bryony Howells, and next to her we have?
I'm Chloe Lawless and I'm studying photojournalism and documentary photography in University of Wales, Cindy St David.
Okay.
Messed that up then.
That's a mouthful. That's great. Okay, well, let's start with Bryony. I keep messing up your name.
That's fine, that's good.
Bryony, is that
Yeah.
close enough? That may be as close as I get. So product design, can you tell us exactly how that's defined and the kinds of things you're doing in college for that major, and also the kinds of things you might be doing after college once you've finished that degree?
The way I see my course is that it is a combination of art, engineering. We learn to use software, so we do computer-aided design. We learn how to use woods, metals. We do fiberglass in workshops. But for me, I come from an art background, so I definitely like to push my work in a more creative way than the engineering students would.
Okay.
And so, like, when I graduate, I'm not sure where I want to take that, but I do like to use fine art in my own time, to sort of, as a hobby more than anything.
Okay, well, that's fascinating, a mixture of art and engineering. You did mention what we call CAD here, computer-aided
Yeah.
design. So would it be correct, and kick me under the table or correct me if I don't get this right, that you're an artist who uses information technology and technological are technological achievements to create art? So is this computer-aided art? Or
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Like I, for one, struggle with CAD. It's not something I'm really comfortable working in, but it's a nice tool to have, and it's really good for when you go to work in industry. But for me and some of the people in my class, we'd use that to sort of define our projects a bit better, and we use it to display our work.
Okay.
But then you could use that to 3D print and make prototypes. But I like to work with more physical materials as opposed to working through computers.
And one question that I like to ask of my students, especially before they graduate, is where would you like to be in 10 years? Given that degree, ideally, what would you like to be doing, or what kind of job will that qualify you for if your luck comes out well and you end up doing what you want to do?
Growing up, I always imagined myself being a little powerhouse. So I wanted my own sort of company. I wanted to be like a very prominent person within the design world, because on a product design course especially, there isn't a lot of females. So my first year there was just the two of us amongst all the boys, and then it went up to 4. So I wanted to have my own company and have sort of a powerhouse to my name and have products being out on the market. But now I'm at a bit of a crossroads as to what I want to do.
Okay, sure. Well, that's interesting because in America as well, engineering schools are more male than anything else. Our medical schools are 50-50, our law schools are 50-50, graduate schools of engineering are still 80-20 male over female. So we have that issue in the United States too, that women do not enter engineering the way they do as much. So I'm not surprised that you're saying something with art and engineering didn't have many women in it.
Yeah, it does annoy me a little bit.
Okay, well, you're making that up. Let's move on to Chloe. Now, I think most of us would understand what photojournalism is. You're writing journalism at the same time you're taking pictures to go with it. Would that? Please.
It's more photojournalism is. It's the opposite of that. It's showing the narrative through the images.
Oh, okay.
Words.
Okay. So creating a narrative, but just through photos.
Yes.
Okay.
They always say a picture can say 1,000 words. And
Okay. Now, I'm so elderly that I started with a Nikon camera and 35 millimeter film, and I'd have to be in the dark in order to, or whatever, to load it. Now, even when I see somebody with a Nikon, they just have some kind of computer drive or something in it, and I'm not going to use the term right, a card or something instead of the film. What kinds of, are you working with digital cameras? Are you working with the old school cameras?
I've used film, but I'm prominently digital. That's
Okay.
where I base myself, and color is my go-to, but I do specialize in some black and white also.
Okay. And again, showing my age, back in the day when I was in high school and college in the 1960s and 70s, the high-end fashion photographers preferred black and white because just all the shades of gray and everything you get rather than color, which was too gaudy. Is there still that belief in fine arts photography, or?
In photojournalism, black and white is very heavily used because, well, I can't really explain it, it's gone from my mind.
Yeah.
It is the same, the black and white photography, it expresses a lot more than what color. Color, especially digital today, tends to have a colder feel, but with film photography, particularly black and white photography, the grain gives some sort of life where you can connect with the image.
Right. Well, and that makes sense to me because to me there's a dignity in black and white, especially with people's faces and things like that. you know, people are looking, they're happy or they're sad or they've got a very complex expression, and it seems the color just makes it too much of a cartoon, but the black and white you have.
It's more serious, and photojournalism as well is very history based, so you're expected to see images within black and white. That's my
Okay.
opinion anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you both for those answers. A few more minutes before we swap you out for the other two students. Have either of you been in the United States before this trip?
Yes.
Okay, and where did you visit earlier when you came?
New York.
Oh, New York City?
Yeah,
Okay,
did all the arty
sure,
exhibits, art museums.
sure. So, Chloe, for you, this is your first time. And even doing the art museums and things like that in New York, this is the first time you've come in from the East Coast then to see. Tell us about what it's like here. It's incredibly hot and humid. I mean, I know that. What else, though, in terms of either visually or the people or anything else, anything from the airport to here, and any observations?
It's very culturally different than what we're used to.
Yeah.
More multicultural or just culturally different?
Culturally different.
Okay.
I find that people tend to keep themselves more to themselves, and then the people that do engage with us are really like outgoing and nice and bubbly and excited, and it's nice.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
good. What are your other goals before you go back to Wales then? I know you're here to produce art, and that's part of it, but any other goals in the next week or two before you return?
For me, obviously we're looking at Welsh heritage, ancestors and that have come to America, and it's really struck an interest in looking into my family background in particular, so that's something I really want to do while I'm out here, if not while I go home, when I'm at home. I want to look more into my history.
And finally, are there any technological differences or difficulties? I know, for example, certain DVDs we buy here don't run in Western Europe and things like that, but is there anything in terms of the photography you're doing or the product design you're doing where there's like a disconnect? For example, are you mostly PCs or Macintosh in terms of what you do?
I like to work with Mac just because I have a Mac at home, but even in university with me, we don't use Macs. But I have Fusion 360 that runs on my Mac, but there are other softwares that don't. So sometimes it's a little bit harder to have my work in all in one place. But with the university now, they do have Fusion 360 that I can access on my Mac at home.
Great.
So I can pretty much take it anywhere with me.
Great.
I'm more PC.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of Macs. But
Okay. All right. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. Let's swap out for the last two students. Thank you for your comments.
No problem.
And Abigail Fraser, a fine art major, and Holly Jenkins, an illustration major, will be taking the stage as Ms. Howells and Ms. Lawless leave the stage. Great. Please have a seat. And can you introduce yourselves to the
Yeah,
here to the camera, right there.
I'm Holly Jenkins and I'm an illustration student.
Okay.
I'm Abigail Fraser and I'm a Fine Arts Studio Site and Contact student.
Okay, great. So we'll start with Holly since she's next to me. You said you're an illustration major. So does that mean the illustration majors I've met in the States, it's like they might be a medical illustrator. And so then they have to, like, you know, draw the ventricles of the heart or something like that. Is that the kind of thing you're doing? Or maybe like a kid's story and then you'll have to
Not
illustrate?
really.
No, okay, okay, good.
I like my murals. I like doing
Okay.
book covers for children's books. I also do a lot of photography, so I'm not very good at drawing people.
Oh,
So I
okay.
tend to photograph them and then draw over them and around them
Oh,
and incorporate
interesting.
that
Okay.
into it instead.
Okay. Tell me more about murals. That's fascinating.
I just did one before I came. It took me ages and it was massive.
Was it on the side of a building, or was
No, it was inside,
it was in a
in my
studio?
student halls,
Okay.
on the wall in our social room, and it was really bright and colourful and inspired by nature. So
That's wonderful. My high school, which was built 100 years ago in northern Ohio, in Shaker Heights, Ohio, is a beautiful Georgian colonial red brick building, very stately, could be 300 years old, but is in good shape. Inside, all the halls were just white plaster with student lockers. When I visited recently, it's full of murals that have been drawn by the students who are high school students. Some are kind of okay. Most look like they were drawn by fourth graders, even though it's a high school. So I thought that was fascinating. Back in the day, we never would have done that. It's a beautiful old building, but the idea is art improves something, right?
Yeah.
And it's a way of, what is it that you try to convey through your illustration or art? Do you have some basic values, or does it depend
I
on
like to
what
make
you're doing?
people happy, so I use a lot of bright colours, a lot of yellow, neon colours, pastel colours. I don't really do anything that's dark, and it's all inspired by things that I've seen. So nature, my trip to the beach, family outings, so yeah.
Well, that's interesting. You said you want to make people happy by your art,
Yeah.
which is really wonderful. I know I've had artists say, you're an artist if you have a scream inside you that needs to be let out. And I've had other people correct that and say, no, it's if you have joy inside you
Yeah.
that needs to be let out. But I think we generally think art has to be some kind of expression of the human spirit so that other people can connect with it. So, what kinds do you use? Tempera paints? Do you use what do you use when you make a mural?
It's a mixture really. I used quite a lot of wall paint that you can buy in just any store, but I mixed that with acrylic paints as well because it makes it a bit more brighter and nicer.
Okay.
And I did some collaging on there as well with marbling ink, so that was fun.
Okay. Okay, great. Let's move on to Abigail. Now, fine art can be a lot of different areas. So can you tell us more specifically what your focus is within fine art?
My focus is, I'm a mixed media artist.
Okay, mixed
I
media,
call
that
myself a
helps.
mixed media
Sure.
artist. But my focus is mainly on light and symbolism in my work.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. The one art history course I took in college, and that was a long time ago, the professor started the class by saying, in any work of art, you want to look and see where is the light coming from.
Exactly.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I find that really interesting
Yeah.
as a basis. I've always been really into light within paintings and sculptures. So basically, I took a step back and decided to start working with light as my actual medium. So I've been doing LED installations.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and creating symbols that could be understood by anyone in the world. So creating something that's collective, because I feel the light is constantly around all of us, and it's constantly in all mediums of art. So why not create art through light and
Okay.
reverse it?
Okay. Now, I should have asked Gwen and Jonathan and Jeannie about this, but I know when we had students here before, they actually found locations on campus and near campus to create their art from. Is that what the two of you are looking at for now? Are you looking for places to do your art? Are you looking for inspiration for art?
So my course is based on site specificity. So site specificity is when you create work to fit a certain environment, or your work's inspired by a certain environment. So since we've been here so far, we've been looking around all the Welsh chapels. So I've drawn quite a lot of inspiration from that. And I found the religious aspect really interesting, but also how the people that moved to Ohio 201 years ago brought all these interesting things from Wales, and how it's been adapted by other people in Ohio up until today.
Okay, great. And we're down to our last couple minutes, so I'll ask the same question I asked the first two students, and that is, is this your first time in the United States, or have you been here before?
I haven't.
I have.
Okay, and where was your trip to when you came?
Florida.
Oh, Florida, okay. Was it just like Americans do Florida during the winter season when
It
it's
was
warm?
in the summer and it
Oh.
was so hot.
Oh, I'll bet.
But it was a proper Disney holiday.
Oh, so that was a Disney
Yeah.
holiday to Orlando
Yeah.
and that whole area. And did you go to Epcot and other
Yeah,
things?
all of those
Right.
things.
Yeah. I don't have much. I took my older kids to Disneyland. I've been able to avoid the younger kids going there. I don't like lines. I'm not crazy about crowds. And I really dislike Florida, but we won't go there. So tell us about the cultural shift that you see, the cultural difference. I know I don't get abroad from the States very much, but I did go to Minsk, Belarus last year through Turkey going and through Finland coming back. And there is no greater difference than flying Turkish Air, which is similar to a 1950s Greyhound bus, and flying Finnair, which was delightful. And even just going through Helsinki on the way back, as opposed to going through Turkey on the way there. I mean, it was just, I felt like a little kid because I don't get out of the States much. Do you notice cultural differences?
I have noticed a huge cultural difference in religion since being here, which I
Really?
found really interesting. Because there's loads of Welsh chapels in Wales and things like that, but since coming here, there's been a huge impact on religion, and I found that really interesting, especially as there's like still Amish people here, and I
Oh,
found that so
yes.
fascinating.
Yeah,
So,
right,
yeah,
right.
it's something that I've not seen before, and we're not used to
Sure.
in our daily lives. So it's really interesting to see.
Well, and it scares me sometimes because people, generally our roads here are 55 miles an hour on the 2-lane roads, and then you'll come up over a ridge and suddenly there's a horse and buggy, you know, and there have been some horrific accidents, but it's fascinating the way they try to keep
Yeah.
those aspects of their culture. And any differences that you notice? I know one thing I always notice in the States, if 4 people are on a tight elevator and 2 people leave, in the United States we're like molecules, or what is it called, entropy? You know, we will reposition ourselves. In Europe, if there's 5 people on a cramped elevator and 3 leave, the other guy is right here next to me and he's not moving. And as an American, you know, isn't that true? I mean, that's one difference I see, is that I think Americans expect more space, and if we don't have it, we feel really uncomfortable. Or is that a gross generalization, and have I not been abroad often enough? Okay. We're getting some comments from our studio audience here, but I can't hear what they're saying. I mean, even things like the people in the airport, the people, well, I don't know, you didn't have a rental car agency because you had the van already, but, or even food and things like that. I know we talk about breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but I know in Europe, my friends often say breakfast, dinner, and supper.
Breakfast, dinner, and tea.
Dinner and tea, okay.
No.
No?
No. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
It's
Okay.
up for debate.
So is this a rural-urban issue in Wales? Is one of you from the city and one from the country, or is
I'm
it just...
from the city.
I'm from the valleys, they're on the valleys,
Okay.
but I study in Swansea, which is a city.
Oh,
so-
sure, okay. Okay, well, we are right at the end of our show. Thank you so much. I've got Holly and Abigail here. Bryony, whose name I continue to mispronounce. I'm just going to call her Ms. Howells for the rest of the 2 weeks. Chloe, Gwen, Jonathan, Dan Robotham, Jeannie Gendra. Thank you all. These are wonderful people. Welcome. Have a wonderful visit. Go back and tell them how much you love it in Ohio. Mike Thompson, thanks as well. See you guys next month. And please click on Voice of Rio Grande when you go to YouTube for more good shows. Thanks to my many guests today. Have a good afternoon.